tails are an amazing evolutionary feature that plenty of animals make use of, from just balancing to stabilizing during a glide, or as a tool for self-defense. And the monster we're looking at today is all about its tail, the fire chicken itself, Quematrice. And as a new addition to the Monster Hunter's hit list, this chicken is one of my favorite new monsters design-wise, even if its fights aren't exactly cinematic, especially when compared to things like Raydao or Jindahad. But there's just something so fun and simplicity of seeing the closest a chicken will ever get to being a T-Rex and deciding that it would make a killer outfit. Which it does, by the way, just look at this. But of course, before you can actually wear the Quematrice, you have to hunt this thing down, meaning you need the right knowledge and gear to be ready for anything it's going to throw at you. And for that, I welcome you to this episode of A DM's Guide to Monster Hunting. Like plenty of other early game monsters, the Quematrice lives in the starting area of the Wayward Plains. And this brute wyvern can mostly be found roaming between the grassy plains and the desert oasis in search of food, since it's a little too clumsy to properly get around the rocky and more cliffy areas. They're also naturally scavengers, so instead of hunting for themselves, they just take the leftovers from anything a bigger monster left behind, which usually ends in one of three ways: the Quematrice fighting the monster that actually made the kill, fighting a different Quematrice for said carrion, or fighting smaller monsters like Talioth for the meal. And yes, sometimes Talioth do take out Quematrice or other monsters out of sheer numbers. But even still, the Quematrice does its best to take advantage of its environment and is surprisingly effective at using its bulk and specialized tail for fighting, using its tail to set fire to the dry grasses of the plains and keep smaller monsters at bay. Now obviously this can be avoided by just going around, but most things don't tend to stick around after half their body gets first-degree burns. Now I don't think it's too much of a stretch to say that Quematrice here is not at the top of the food chain. Sure, it'll throw down with the box art monster or even Rathian, but if you push a real chicken into a corner, it's gonna do its damnedest to peck your eyes out too, so it's not really saying a whole lot. Now like I mentioned before, Quematrice does have a few tricks up its sleeve. Well, one, it has one singular trick, that being the highly flammable oil that it stores in its tail. And this oil not only gets everywhere when this thing swings its tail around, but it is also easily ignited when the Quematrice drags its flint-like feathers along the ground, which it uses to either A, set you and your team on fire, or B, make a ring of fire around itself for protection. And really the Quematrice's tail is its best weapon with its heaviest hitting attacks. But that's not really saying all that much. And despite being modeled off a prey animal, or more than likely because of it, the Quematrice is extremely territorial and will fight literally anything it feels threatened by. It does not matter if that's a Doshagama, Raydao, Rathian, or the box art monster Arkveld, it will throw hands and it will probably die in the process.
Perfection.
Now being a lower tiered monster means that your defensive options against Quematrice aren't going to be as limited as with something stronger. Sure, you've got to watch out for Fire Blight, but no matter how fearless it is and as much as it wants to send you packing on the Palico wagon, Quematrice just isn't going to be pulling a railgun out of its ass like Raydao. So as long as you've got decent fire resist and clear Fire Blight when you need to, you should be fine. Offensively though, I think its weaknesses are pretty damn obvious. You bring the water-based weaponry against the Fire Chicken. And if its tail is really tripping you up, breaking it, or better yet, lopping it off, can really limit the reach and effectiveness of its fire attacks. And really, outside of its tail attacks, there's not much to worry about. As much as I love this dumb bird, its fights are anything but hard, and I'm sure a dedicated hunter could easily take it out with just the kick attacks from the greatsword. And I really can't properly explain my love for this thing, from its silly intro cutscene to its very prey-like behavior on self-defense, or maybe something about its design, but the Quematrice just feels like it could be real. Sure, it's not a badass lightning dragon, it is a simple but fun design that I think is really good for an early game monster. And there's something about that feeling, about hunting down a monster that feels believable as something that could actually exist, that the Quematrice and monsters like it aren't just there for you to hunt, but are part of a greater ecosystem. Now if you're like me at all and are a huge nerd, which I assume you are at this point since you're still watching the video, but if you are like me, you might have wanted to take different monsters from Monster Hunter or other series and throw them at your D&D party. Because you can only fight a Tarrasque or a dragon so many times before it gets boring, and tossing some new monsters at your party with new mechanics sounds fun. But at the same time, that is a lot of work, especially if you're running a large table. So just like with Raydao, I have taken Quematrice from its home in Monster Hunter and given it a D&D 5e stat block that you can use to make your players feel bad for bullying the Fire Chicken, and it is 100% free. And just like the real Quematrice, my version is extremely simple because I'm doing my best to be mostly authentic. So real quick, let's go through what we know already so we can get that out of the way. Obviously, the fire chicken is resistant to fire damage, and because it's seemingly pretty damn clumsy, it has high strength for smacking hunters around. Now, the first big change from the original stat block is obviously that there is no water damage in D&D. And instead of just giving it vulnerability to cold damage, which was my first kind of lazier option, I opted to give it a weakness to water in a similar way to how fire elementals work. But where those take damage, Quematrice just has some performance issues when it comes to its tail attacks after you blast it with enough water. You can still, of course, just chop it off if you want to, but I have not actually made a system for severing parts just yet, but if you want me to, I can totally do that. And of course, I added the big tail smacks. But really, that's about all I can do. Obviously, it has other attacks, but I really don't want to bore you with the super specific details of the stat block, so let's move on to my next thing. Now, last time I took Raydao and I made it into the volcanic Raydao as a kind of fun subspecies. And I really like the idea of making some of these subspecies or variants for all the monsters in this series. So as long as I can come up with an idea that isn't just a color palette of, hey, there's an Ergokuga, but this time it's green, I'll probably do it. And for Quematrice, I wanted to do something kind of funny and introduce a slightly new mechanic with the Fungal Quematrice subspecies. Obviously, I do not have any footage of this beast because I cannot record things that do not exist, but I can give you the premise. A normal Quematrice has a special organ or flame sac in their tail that produces and stores the fuel for their fires. But the Fungal Quematrice has instead let that organ be taken over by a variety of different fungi. Fungi? Whichever one. Now at first this doesn't really seem like a good deal for the bird, with its main line of defense now lacking its signature flames. But these fungus aren't living in the tail rent-free. In exchange for safety and having their spores spread around, they help in not only keeping the Quematrice more healthy, but also by aiding in combat in place of its fire. And for this part, I did my best to model these different mushrooms and spore effects off of the mushrooms in Monster Hunter, with the effects ranging from basic healing to paralysis or sleep effects on the enemy, and some just buff Quematrice like the Excite or Muscle Shrooms. And if Quematrice happens to roll a 6 on this ability, it gets to use the Nitro Shroom Spores, meaning that even though it no longer has a working flame sac, it still gets to do fire damage, or I guess blast damage. Also, it's not quite done yet, but there might be another surprise here that somebody else made, but you'll have to check out the sheet in the link below to see if that's there or not. Now, while I could end things here, I think there's one more monster that needs a little love, and there's also no way I can make an entire separate video on it, so let's take a quick look at the very first monster that we actually fight in Wilds, the desert frog Chatacabra. Chatacabra might not be the first monster we fight, technically if you count the intro cutscene, but the moment we're actually handed a weapon, it's to put this frog in the ground. And while it is extremely simple, I love the design, because apart from being the size of an electric car, Chatacabra is extremely realistic. Considering that here on Earth, we have a species of frog that breaks its own finger bones to form retractable claws, this one using mucus to pick up rocks on its arms for extra armor really isn't that hard to believe. Being the only amphibian monster currently on the roster, it is kind of a shame that Chatacabra is relegated to just getting spanked by the hunter once, maybe twice if you really want that armor for the next 2 or 3 missions. But again, it's the opening monster, it's only going to get so much screen time. Anyways, despite Chatacabra being a frog, it lives in the rocky cave-like interior of the Windward Plains and rarely ventures out from its home turf, mostly eating bugs like these little guys here that really love to get in my way while I'm trying to get footage. So despite being a frog, Chatacabra lives in what is effectively a massive desert, and stays close to the underground water systems to stay moist. Also, it's a bit too small down there for Raydao to come knocking, and anything that can fit is also usually small enough for the frog to just gulp down. Now, unlike some monsters, Chatacabra actually isn't all that aggressive, but it can and will throw hands if it's attacked or if it gets hungry. Using its long tongue, the Chatacabra will coat its limbs in an adhesive mucus before smashing them into the ground to gather rocks, bits of metal, or debris, really anything it can get its hands on to use as armor and weapons, and then it will start punching you in the face with them.
Perfection.
I'm not really sure what to say here. Yes, the Chatacabra has weaknesses, and if you let it pummel you into the ground, it's gonna deal some damage. But like, you beat this thing with the most basic of basic bitch gear. But if for some reason you really want to bully this poor frog, make sure to bring either lightning or ice-based weaponry, and it's gonna have a really bad day. And outside of that, I guess just like try not to get swallowed, because while in-game this attack really isn't anything to worry about, the idea that this thing is large enough to not only swallow a hunter whole, but will in fact try to, is a little terrifying. Plus, at the end of the day, the hunters like yours that are bullying Chatacabra aren't just newbie hunters on their first day, they're experienced, and anyone who isn't a hunter stands very little chance, other than to just maybe run away, I guess? And even that is a tough call, because not only do Chatacabra have extremely long tongues, they're fast as hell for their size, and are still frogs, meaning they have some impressively long jumps. And while the Chatacabra is probably going to be stuck at the bottom of the barrel when it comes to strength, or being a threat, I'm really hopeful that it being here means that Capcom is going to add some more frog monsters in the future. Now here is where I would normally go over the stat block for Chatacabra. And I did make one. See, I even ended up filling out this extra sheet here for the video. Again, using this amazing sheet that the Yaba made for me. But I don't really have much to show. Chatacabra is an average CR5 monster. And yes, I made him CR5 because I wanted this gigantic frog to be a little bit more threatening than your average, like, bear. And really, he's got a super basic kit outside of his one mucus coating feature, making him a little bit harder to hit for a few turns, while also having him hit a little harder on his end. But obviously, I also wanted to make a stronger version of our frog friend here. And this time, I actually had direct inspiration from Monster Hunter itself in the form of a different in-game frog. This one's just a little smaller. So, while the normal Chatacabra is pretty weak and, all things considered, small for the monsters we fight in the series, overall, he's unimpressive. I wanted to take this poor, buff frog to the extreme, and not make a subspecies, but instead a variant. Now in Monster Hunter, there are a bunch of different weird names for different versions of monsters, with subspecies being a branch of the main species like our Fungal Quematrice, while things like variants and deviants are individual members of a species that have something special about them. Think like the savage devil Joe that is even angrier and hungrier because it resorted to cannibalism. And in the case of my new Chatacabra, V from My Wife is the MC and I came up with a concept that takes a few pages out of a much stronger monsters book. The Brachiodeus, the giant obsidian-plated slime-throwing brute wyvern that can and will punch anything and everything on sight. And from this, we get a massive, overgrown Chatacabra that lives almost completely on a diet of nitro toads and nitro shrooms, turning its mucus from just sticky and gross to sticky and highly explosive. And of course, in line with the much smaller Nitro Toad, this is the Nitro Chatacabra. A Chatacabra that has grown so large and strong that it is confident enough to hunt down Ajaricons for even more explosive fuel. Is this even close to something we might remotely get in-game? Obviously not. But would it not be fun to see our poor little bullied frog from the very start of the game absolutely bodying the exploding gorilla that dive bombs you like it's trying to impress the Basil Goose? I think so. And of course, along with Quematrice, Fungal Quematrice, and the normal Chatacabra, you can get the Nitro Chatacabra for your own D&D games completely for free in the link in the description. It's just a homebrewery link. And real quick, before you go, just tell me what your favorite monster in Monster Hunter Wilds is, and maybe I'll make that one next. It does have to be from Wilds though, I only have so much space on my hard drive, so I gotta take these games one by one. I'll get to Worlds and Rise and maybe some of the older ones eventually. And that about does it. Thanks for sticking around till the end of the video. I will see you all next time, and as always, have a wonderful day.